Welcome to another episode of the Forbidden Films podcast.
This is a podcast about the movies they won't make anymore. I'm Barry Germansky, a film producer.
And I'm Wayne Kramer, a writer and director. Today we're throwing ourselves on the altar of 1973's controversial and influential folk horror classic, The Wicker Man. The Wicker Man, written by the brilliant Anthony Shaffer and directed by Robin Hardy, is a film that sits in my top 10 favorite films of all time. That is how much I love this film. I consider it a stone-cold masterpiece and rate it my favorite horror movie alongside Rosemary's Baby. I question whether The Wicker Man is technically a horror movie, since it plays more like a carnival ride thriller, and the supernatural aspects are only hinted at, if they exist at all. There probably hasn't been a film this brilliant in script performance and execution that has been kicked around as badly by its financiers and distributors. Christopher Lee, the star of The Wicker Man, alongside Edward Woodward and Britt Ekland, lamented the way the film was handled until the day he died, including how the negative to restore the film to Robin Hardy's original director's cut had been discarded and buried under, it was either the M3 or M4 motorway in England. A multitude of cuts have been thrown out there, restored from various positive prints or distributor submission prints, as well as most recently a print that was housed at the Harvard Film Archive and was used for the recent Wicker Man The Final Cut restoration. However, I don't consider the most recent The Final Cut to be the definitive cut of the film. For that, I always turn to Robin Hardy's director's cut myself, even if the quality of the footage that exists only in the director's cut is subpar and culled from the Magnum home video release of the 102-minute director's cut that was released on VHS in 1978, and later was released again in 1985 and 1988. I remember bidding fiercely on eBay to get my hands on a copy of that VHS, and I think I paid over $100 for it. This was before the first DVD release of it by Anchor Bay. So, Barry, what version have you seen?
I've seen the Blu-ray edition that says the final cut on it. And I probably saw an earlier version of it as well, but I saw it on TV for the first time, so I don't know exactly which version it was. The first time I saw it, this was a long time ago. But I love every version that I've seen. And if I'm using the Blu-ray that I own as the one that I return to the most, yeah, I'll say I'm satisfied with it. And I'll just say that Anthony Shaffer is one of my favorite playwrights and one of my favorite screenwriters. I think very few dramatists, regardless of medium, have ever been as extravagant in their theatricality. Specifically, if we're talking about Sleuth, both the play and the 1972 film adaptation, I think he sort of takes theatricality to the limit, but in the best way possible. Because I'm not somebody who necessarily has a firm, dedication to realism. So I like things that are over the top or eccentric. And Anthony Shaffer's best work could definitely be labeled those two things.
Yeah, Anthony Shaffer is a fantastic writer, and Sleuth is also a great movie. I wanted to still stay on the topic of the final cut versus the director's cut versus the theatrical cut, because I think the first time I saw The Wicker Man, it was playing on late night network TV in the US here, and I had heard about the movie. I was intrigued by it, and I think I tuned in, and it was already 20, 30 minutes into it, and it just hooked me immediately. Now, of course, this version had none of the nudity. I'm not even sure how they even played the shorter version, which I think is
What year was that you saw
Oh,
it?
it had to be around like 87, 86,
Okay.
somewhere like that. And I sort of became intrigued with the film and kept looking for it. It was very difficult to find at that point. I think it originally came out in 1978 and then was re-released. And I got the Magnum home video release off eBay. I won a fierce bidding war, which cost me dearly.
What year was that?
I would say early 2000s.
Oh,
I mean, I
okay.
was getting an old tape. It was probably the 95 or 1988 tape. I do still have it somewhere. And that was the director's cut, by the way.
Oh, okay.
And that's the first time I saw the full movie, and I was astounded by how much I loved it and how brilliantly imagined it was, and also how erotic and immersive the film is.
It is.
And it's so brilliantly conceived. So it's very sad what happened with this film, because British Lion financed this film in the UK. And after it was finished filming, I believe, British Lion got taken over by a company, and these two guys were put in charge. One was producer Michael Dealey, and another guy was Barry Spikings, who I think was a financial guy. And Michael Dealey, who I think people know his name from Blade Runner, I think he was a producer on Blade Runner and was involved with the Deer Hunter. He was not a person ignorant of the film industry. I think his father had been an editor, something like that. But apparently Michael Dealey hated the movie, and he didn't think the movie could be marketed in America, which was a priority for them. And he just seemed to have a real bug up his ass about the film. And he reached out to Roger Corman in the US to get Corman's input on what would make the film more commercial and would allow them to get a US distribution deal. And I think Dealey was hoping Corman himself would take it on. So he sends him, and I believe it was a 35 millimeter positive print of the cut of the film, because at that time they had locked the director's cut, and I think they had finished it. So it was a 102-minute cut. This was the full version that Robin Hardy stood by, and so did Christopher Lee. So they send this print to Roger Corman, and Roger Corman makes all these suggestions or notes that he sends back to Michael Dealey, which become the basis for the butchered 87-minute cut that was then released around the world. And they made these cuts without consulting with Robin Hardy or Christopher Lee or any of the essential people in the production. And Robin Hardy was mortified. In fact, both Robin Hardy and Christopher Lee only saw it when the film finally got released as the bottom half of a double bill with Don't Look Now, which I believe Michael Dealey's company picked up for distribution. They weren't even going to release The Wicker Man in England, and they had told them that they weren't going to release it.
What was their main objection to the film?
I think they just didn't get it. I wouldn't be surprised if they were offended by the morality put forward in The Wicker Man, which is very pro-pagan and anti-Christian. However you look at it, I guess you have to arrive at that assessment of it. It's so hard for me to understand, because when you watch this movie, it is so evident what a brilliant film it is, what a fun film it is, what a challenging and just go for it kind of film it is, and it grips you. I don't get it. I'm not sure why Dealey and other people responded to that.
Especially because Anthony Shaffer at the time had had so many big hits, right? He had won the Tony Award for Sleuth. I mean, he had had a big hit with the Sleuth movie and with Alfred Hitchcock's Frenzy, which he wrote. So you would think that money people would have had more faith in Anthony Shaffer at that particular moment.
They never do. They never do.
Well, there you go.
But let me get back. So all the people involved in the original production were mortified because, and this is why I specify what version do you see, because if you're watching the original theatrical cut, the butchered cut, Sergeant Howie's presence on the island is being reduced to just one night. They cut so much out of the original cut. They removed the Gently Johnny song, which takes place when Edward Woodward's in bed listening to them sing it in the pub. And that's not there in the 87-minute version. They consolidate the movie so it feels like Edward Woodward only spends one night on the island where he spends two in the full version. And I think in the final cut, I believe he does spend 2 nights there.
Well, that's the version that I watch, or I should say rewatch the most. It's the final cut on Blu-ray.
Well, I don't think you have the director's cut at all, do you?
I don't own it, no.
So what happened, how the director's cut or a version of that exists today, and it's in very poor quality, is because I think when Robin Hardy was putting together the theatrical cut for home video, I don't know how he got permission to do it in terms of the distributor, but somehow he was allowed to release the director's cut. Except the footage that he needed, which meant going back to the negative, had been destroyed by British Lion or Michael Dealey or whoever was there, discarded the negative And no one is exactly sure if this is true or urban legend or whatever it is, but supposedly the negative was thrown into, they were constructing the M3 or M4 freeway, whatever it was in London. All this refuse was thrown into the foundation or whatever it was. I'm not even sure how something gets under, or it was a garbage dump or something, and they built the freeway over it. Something. Smarter people will know the answer to that. So now Robin Hardy couldn't even find the original assets to make his director's cut. Then somehow he realizes that Roger Corman never returned the 102-minute director's cut positive print that they sent him. And Roger Corman at one point did intend to buy the rights, but his bid was too low. And British Lion ended up taking another deal with an American distributor who then promptly went out of business. It's such a mess. And then somehow those rights all ended up with Warner Brothers, and then Warner Brothers lost them because the tax shelter fund that was run by Lawrence Gordon accused Warner Brothers of misuse of the rights, and somehow the movie came back to Lawrence Gordon, which I think, and I don't know if that's the same Lawrence Gordon, producer of The Warriors and all these other movies, but his name is now still on the final cut version that you have in your hands. But anyway, Roger Corman admitted that he had still kept this print, and he sent it back. I hope I'm getting the timeline on this right. He sent it back to the UK, or they made the videos in America of the Magnum release, and that was the director's cut. And then that print itself seemed to disappear. Like nobody knows what happened to the actual film element of that. But the video master that they used for this Magnum release, which was the full movie, existed, except it was in crappy video quality.
So this is why you had to go on eBay and track it down, right? Because I will also say it was very hard for me to ever find a copy of this on home video until the internet really became a big deal.
No, it wasn't. I don't know if it was that hard. I mean, these videos
For me, it
were out
was.
there. But a couple years later, Anchor Bay got the rights to release The Wicker Man, and they brought out a special edition, which I bought. This was standard DVD now, and it came out in like a pinewood box. It was like a very cool release. And they included the director's cut, and they included the theatrical cut. The theatrical cut, they still had the negative for. So they were able to transfer that in a pristine new version. And then where they needed the pieces of the director's cut, they went back to the videotape and took it. And that, to this day, is the only way you can see the director's cut. I'm not saying it's not available, because I bought a 4K Blu-ray about a year ago, I think, that has the best quality version of The Wicker Man. It has like multiple cuts on it. It has the director's cut, it has the final cut, and it has the theatrical cut.
Do you enjoy the different cuts that are available? Do you enjoy it when a movie comes in many different forms, or do you prefer it when there's just one easy theatrical cut?
No, I hate it. I hate it when, unless a film has been so egregiously treated like The Wicker Man, I hate it when these directors, whether it be Michael Mann or Ridley Scott, they keep making multiple versions of
Yeah, it
the movie.
annoys me. I get confused. I can't keep track of what's what.
But in the case of The Wicker Man, the theatrical version of the movie was an abomination. So all that remains, because nobody has access to quality assets, including the final cut, it's so confusing because the final cut is the most recent cut that came out of the movie. But the reason it's called the final cut is because they found this print in the Harvard Film Archive that was better quality, that had pieces that were better quality that the director's cut still had in video quality. But not all of them, because it wasn't the director's cut. So they replaced those pieces. So there's 3 levels of quality now when you watch the director's cut in 4K. There's the original pieces of the negative, which was the theatrical cut. Then it's the video pieces, which was the full director's cut, but only ever released on video. And then there's the extra pieces from the final cut, which has more than the theatrical cut, but less than the director's cut. So I personally always watch the director's cut, even though the quality keeps shifting radically. And I'll tell you why. Because there are scenes missing from the director's cut that I love in all the other versions. Especially, okay, so the theatrical cut starts on the mainland. Now, the final cut has some little pieces of that, mostly in the church. but it does not have. So Sergeant Howie flies into Scotland, the mainland. He lands his plane, and then he goes to his police station where he sees his constable, a guy who's working under him. And there's some graffiti on the wall that says Jesus saves. And the constable goes, "Oh, I'm sure you love the sentiment of that comment." And Howie responds, "Yes, I do, but there's a time and place for everything." So even he wasn't approving of the graffiti. Then they go into the police station, or there's another piece where Howie is driving with the constable at night. There's something going on. But you're getting all this backstory about Howie, like Howie's this religious guy who's kind of the joke of the village, because even the cops under him and the mailman who come over, they're joking about how Howie is more into God than his fiance, and how Howie has been going for 2 years dating this woman and hasn't touched her because he wants to be a virgin at marriage.
Yes.
And they're joking about this, and then Howie walks in, and that's when they present him this letter sent from the mainland trying to get Howie to come investigate the disappearance of Rowan Morrison.
Yes.
And then you also see the stuff in the church, and then Howie gets in his plane and he starts flying. And that's when the second half of the theatrical cut credits come on, because the theatrical cut starts with Howie on the way to Summerisle already. There's none of the mainland stuff. That was a Roger Corman note. He said, get rid of it, which was ridiculous. So why I also mention why this is important is because I believe that the constable character is the one who tipped off the Summerisle people about Sergeant Howie being the perfect candidate for their sacrificial ceremony that they needed.
Oh, that's interesting.
He plays it very interesting, and I think the information is there. It's just so much stuff from the mainland prologue that you need to see.
Yes, that's an interesting point. I never even thought about that specifically. Like, how did they pick him or why? I just sort of went along with the fog of uncertainty that seems to permeate the movie.
Well, they explain it. They explain it right before they put him in the Wicker Man, why and how. But you don't really see him on the mainland where you see who he was. That the fact that he was already the brunt of jokes in his village.
Well, what I mean is they picked him because he fit the profile that they want, right? For a sacrifice. But
they had to know. They had to know about that.
Yeah, I didn't realize how they actually
off.
did that. Yeah, I didn't realize that, but it didn't matter to me because I just thought it was an interesting twist and an interesting overall concept. But now that you mention it, that's very intriguing.
Yeah, there are other pieces in it. The songs, the bawdy songs are extended. There are extra verses of it. Oh, and in Britt Ekland's dance to Willow's song, there's much more footage, and it's much more explicit because you see, I'm not talking about the body doubles they used of her when she's got her back to the camera. Apparently, she was not happy with her butt. And so that in itself has got a multitude of stories of why she didn't shoot those shots. Some people say she was pregnant. She says she didn't know she was pregnant. It seems to be that she wasn't comfortable doing those full-length shots and wasn't that satisfied with her body, which is ridiculous because she was a literal goddess.
Yeah, she has very high standards.
Yeah. But you actually see her walking around her room, and there are these phallic statues, and she's caressing them. And all of that is not in any other version except the director's cut. And she's touching these pieces of barley, and it's all so much more erotic in the director's cut. And I'm trying to think what else there was. Oh, there was even this little piece that's only in the director's cut when Howie is running through the village trying to find Rowan Morrison at the end, and he's breaking into all these houses, and he's seeing all these like weird people, and they're all getting ready for the ceremony, and they're wearing these weird masks.
Yes.
And I love those masks.
Yeah, they're
so
great.
brilliantly conceived. But there's one little moment, it's like just a few seconds, where he barges into the hairdresser, and you see all these women sitting under the dryers, and they've got these masks on, and they just look at him, and it's so trippy. Just to be clear, you can find the director's cut fairly easy now. I don't know if I bought a 4K from the UK, but I don't know if that version has gone out of print yet. But it does have the director's cut in there, and there's the old DVD, and I think it was Anchor Bay as well brought out a Blu-ray that had the director's cut and the theatrical cut. This was even before the final cut, or maybe that was also the final cut. It's so fucking confusing, but
It
I
is
know
very
it's out there.
confusing.
It's out there. You have to be a Wicker Man fan to want to see the director's cut because there are definite drops in quality when these additional moments come on. But I think they're essential to the movie.
Well, at least
And
when it comes
frankly,
to Close Encounters, you can find all the copies in reasonable shape.
yeah, yeah, and
All
I
the
hate that. I don't
versions.
even know. I don't even know which copy of Close Encounters to watch. Every time I look at my 4K or whatever I have of it, I do not know which one to watch. To this day, I can't tell you what is considered the best version.
I will say this, when it comes to different versions of movies, I tend to find that the theatrical version is the one that I will return to the most, but there are exceptions. This is one of them. There are a number of Oliver Stone movies that, for censorship reasons, were trimmed when they were released theatrically, meaning things weren't taken out for creative reasons. And so I find the director's cuts of JFK and Nixon are superior to the theatrical cuts. But generally speaking, I do prefer the theatrical cut of most movies. I find that the, instinctive decisions of the filmmakers are usually right the first time.
That's if the theatrical version reflected their original vision and wasn't taken away from them by the company, which is
But the
why
thing is, as an audience member, you see, I don't necessarily know that unless I go digging into the backstory, which as a cinephile I tend to do. But when I first watch a movie, I don't necessarily know the entire backstory. So I'm just receiving the work of art with very little preconceived notions, right? So I'm just looking at it from sort of an unbiased, innocent perspective. And again, this is a generalization, but I tend to think that the theatrical cuts of most movies flow better than the director's cuts. Like, for example, Amadeus, I think and by the way, that was written by Anthony Shaffer's brother, Peter. I think the director's cut of that movie isn't very good. The extra scenes just disturb the flow. And
which is so strange because I do prefer the director's cut on
oh,
that,
you do?
and I do prefer the edginess of it. It's a little bit more explicit in places. But I am a supporter of director's cuts because as a filmmaker, I understand that the reason a director's cut exists is because usually there was obstruction to the director in the first place to getting the full film out there for reasons of, audiences won't sit through a film this long, or that scene makes us uncomfortable, or we don't like it for this reason. For example, Blade Runner is a film that has been put out in multiple cuts.
Yes. It's
And
very confusing to sift through those as well.
And I do prefer the final cut of Blade Runner, but also I'm kind of don't mind the Harrison Ford voiceover.
Yeah, I missed the voiceover in the final cut.
But I think the ending of the final cut is a way better ending than what's in the theatrical cut.
Well, yeah, the emphasis is on the ambiguity.
Yes. And that's
in the final cut.
Yes. There are one or two director's cuts that I think have butchered their own movie. And I'll talk specifically, even though this is off topic, about the worst of them. And that's Tony Scott's Revenge. Tony Scott's Revenge is a much longer movie in the theatrical cut, which usually the theatrical cut is the shorter version and the director's cut is the longer version. But when Tony Scott,
it's funny how that works sometimes.
When Tony Scott released the director's cut, he gutted his entire movie of some of the best character-driven scenes that made me love Revenge in the first place. And he replaced some of the great Jack Nietzsche score. There were so many things he did to the movie to try and make it seem modern and tighter. And the only thing that he added to the movie that I liked was that he made it a lot sexier. The Jeep ride with Kevin Costner and Madeline Stowe was much hotter. But he had changed the music on it. So when having to choose between the original theatrical cut with the great Jack Nietzsche track on it, or a little bit more explicit sexuality, I tend to go with the original on that. He added one or two bits, which I think did help the movie, scenes that weren't in the previous film. But for the most part, he took out so many scenes. And I think we'll do an episode on Revenge
Yeah, that would be
in
fun.
the near future because I think it's a great film. And I think there are a lot of qualities in Revenge which you won't see in films anymore.
Actually, there's a number of Tony Scott movies that could fit that description.
It's true.
Like True Romance, for example, to a certain extent, or The Hunger.
It's true. I mean, every film has its own reasons for being what it is and why it may or may not fly today. You know, I could see The Hunger being an A24 film today, but it would certainly have a more diverse cast.
And I will say one more thing about director's cuts. I think what happens is if you happen to see a movie in its theatrical cut first, you become attached to it. And then when you watch the director's cut, you notice it's very jarring where the new scenes are or what has been taken out. At
But
least that's what I find that at least.
but that's where education comes into it. It's like going into a class and you have a preconceived notion of what this book is going to be about or what this film is going to be about. And someone says, you've always known this version of the film, but that's not the actual version. Here's what it was intended to be. And then you see it and you go, okay, my brain has a nostalgic attachment to what I saw was the theatrical cut, but let me think about this. This is better. This is better for character development. So I do tend to side with director's cuts, but then I feel a couple of filmmakers like Michael Mann just keep chiseling away. Oliver Stone with Alexander. I mean, there's 500 versions of that film, and none of them are good. You know, so just
But there are fascinating moments, like the entry into Babylon, I think is really interesting. It's
no, I'm sure
spectacle.
there obviously are scenes in the movie, and part of the movie is certainly very watchable. But speaking as a director myself, whose film was taken away from me, Crossing Over, and completely butchered, and the music changed, and everything that you could imagine somebody doing to you, and having to live with that as the film of record, it destroys you inside.
Oh, of course.
I cannot watch that version of the movie. I simply cannot see it because, kind of like what you said, when you see a director's cut of a theatrical cut, all you're thinking about is the way it used to be. When I watch Crossing Over, all I see are all the shots and scenes taken out of it.
Yes.
And it haunts me. And not only is the record of the film not what you intended it to be, but the experience of going through it when guys like Harvey Weinstein and other producers do this to you,
It's traumatic.
it is traumatic. It weighs so heavily on you. I don't know how my wife put up with me for that period because she probably wanted to leave me because you're in such a low mood. And
I can imagine.
you know, it just destroys you because that film in particular was a very personal film to me. And I thought it was the best film I made in its original version. And that somebody has the power to take your work, your art, just make arbitrary bullshit cuts to it, throw out your original idea for the music. I mean, just so I know what Robin Hardy went through.
Yes.
With The Wicker Man. And he spent the rest of his life trying to find this missing footage, trying to legitimize his cut of the movie.
Yes.
He lost his marriage through this process. He made a masterpiece film, and some assholes or people who just had shitty taste and shitty opinions fucked with it, and the man's life was forever changed. And Christopher Lee thought it was the best movie he ever did, and he's not wrong in my opinion. And Christopher Lee never stopped bemoaning how this movie could have been released what it could have been.
Yes, and I should also say, just to clarify what I said earlier, when I say that I tend to prefer theatrical versions of movies, that is a generalization. So when it comes to extreme cases, like what happened to your film, unfortunately, or what happened to The Wicker Man, or The Magnificent Ambersons, Orson Welles' masterpiece, you know, those are completely different stories. For example, if we're talking about the average director's cut, where a director, for curiosity reasons or for something that's not as extreme as what you went through, ends up inserting or taking out certain scenes, like let's say Alien, right? The director's cut of Alien.
Yeah, that's not a good cut.
Exactly. So the thing is, that's what I mean when I say I generally prefer theatrical cuts. Because with the case of Alien, it wasn't a horror story behind the scenes, how it ended up in its theatrical cut. You see what I'm saying? So in other words, I just
Well,
tend to find that the
Ridley Scott
majority.
actually made the right decision when they
I
cut the
agree.
film originally, because
That's
now the
right.
plot line doesn't make sense in terms of the alien life cycle
That's right. But
in
so yeah,
the
I just
director's
made a
cut.
generalization. There's definitely exceptions, and obviously, I should also say that if a movie is taken away from the director by the producers or executives and it's completely butchered, that's a totally different story from a director who decides to revisit a movie of his and play around with some of the scenes. That's not a comparable situation.
No, I do feel that if a director's obsessed enough or intense enough on releasing a director's cut, I think the authorship of it dictates that we take it seriously, but it doesn't
Yes.
always mean that the director's instincts are going to be dead on. But in most cases, I would say 95% of the cases, the director's cut is the better cut of the film.
We should do a whole
So
podcast on that topic.
maybe we will.
Theatrical versions versus director's cuts.
Let's talk about what makes The Wicker Man so controversial and offensive to today's viewers. The film is very erotic and very much in the camp of the pagans versus the Christians, but it also promotes this free sexuality and pagan lifestyle to children in the movie. And I think that probably would upset a lot of people watching the film today, including the sequence, and I don't know if this is even in the final cut, but it's definitely in the director's cut, where Christopher Lee brings this young boy who's probably 14 or 15 in the village to the inn where Willow's staying and calls out to her, and Willow appears in the window. And the idea is that apparently they serve up these young boys to lose their virginity to this beautiful woman, the innkeeper's daughter, so to speak, in the village. And it played out like a ritual when Christopher Lee presents this young boy. I think I even remember his name, Ash Buchanan. And
That's
he's
a good
quoting,
name.
yeah, and Christopher Lee is quoting, I forget which poet it is, while he's presenting the boy to Willow. And then you cut to this footage of these snails mating, which I don't think is in any of the other cuts. And Christopher Lee recites this poem. And I need to find out what the poem was, because Shaffer and Robin Hardy were very specific about it. And then they claimed they couldn't find a record of it anywhere where the poem was published, which is, it was very strange. So that in itself is like, yeah, let's promote underage sex in the film. And then you've got all this footage of these kids dancing around the maypole, which is in itself is a phallic symbol, and
Of course.
everything about the ceremonial dress, like the hobby horse's head is like shaped like a penis, and there's this phallic sculptures everywhere, and they're
Oh, and by the way, Anthony Shaffer's twin brother, Peter Shaffer, wrote Equus.
right.
So maybe this should
Something
be a
was in the
double
water.
feature. Yeah, exactly. Maybe this should be a double feature with Equus. It actually would be a good double feature with that movie because they have very
Yeah.
similar themes now that I think about
Although
it.
although The Wicker Man is a fun movie and Equus is not.
Oh yeah,
I'll
well they have
stipulate.
that's a big difference, yeah. But
Wicker Man,
thematically, there's an overlap.
yeah, for sure. But there are a lot of elements in The Wicker Man that would just knock the senses out of today's fragile viewers in terms of exposing young children to sexuality, or as it would be seen in the film, sex education, or a different philosophy about life. Like when,
Well, actually, the movie's prophetic in that respect because there's a lot of that going on in real life.
exactly. I mean, this is a very transgressive film
It is.
that's wrapped up in an almost detective story
Yes.
and a carnival game. And there's so much going on in here. But when Sergeant Howie comes to the classroom where Diane Salento's character is the teacher on the island, Diane Salento, who is married, or whose marriage was dissolving to Sean Connery at that very time. And then what's crazy is this was 19, I'm assuming since the movie came out in 73, they made it in 72. Then in 1985, Diane Salento marries Anthony Shaffer. Did you know that?
Yeah, I did. That's a small world.
Or something was already
Yeah, maybe.
a brew on Summerisle. But when Howie comes into the classroom, she's teaching them. It's like a very sexual curriculum that they're going on about, and Mayday, and it's all about.
Well, what makes it so disturbing or creepy is the fact that everything is presented in a matter-of-fact, mundane way, right?
Exactly.
This movie, in many ways, is the precursors to The Shining in the sense that it doesn't use the sort of traditional horror trappings that we expect to see in horror movies. And that's probably why some of the executives that you referred to earlier didn't know what to make of the movie because they were expecting something that is more gothic, like a Hammer horror movie. And instead, they got something that didn't play by the rules. And I agree with you, the movie's a masterpiece in many ways, but one way is because it eschews all of the old horror trappings and just plays by its own rules. And it's a very unpredictable movie from one moment to the next.
But what's
Um,
great about that classroom scene too,
yeah.
you kind of get the whole plot of what's going to happen to Sergeant Howie in that classroom because
Yes.
the one girl opens her desk, or it was supposedly Rowan Morrison's desk, and you see the beetle attached to this thread, and there's a nail knocked into the wood in the center, and the beetle is walking around and around and is eventually going to strangle itself or suffocate itself. And they talk about what happens to the beetle, but that's exactly what happens to Sergeant Howie. And
Yes.
I love that scene because it telegraphs in a very smart way exactly where this film's going. And I think
That's
smart
right.
viewers are going to realize that's not just a little speech for the sake of, oh, here's something clever to say.
That's
It's
right.
it's basically selling the guy's fate right there in the moment.
And that's another thing the movie does very well. It builds to a merciless conclusion. You could call this movie Ode to an Implacable Intention. Basically, the intended sacrifice is going to be led to his doom no matter what. Like that's the sense that you get
It's
watching the movie.
inevitable.
Exactly, there's a sense of the inevitable, and it's very difficult in the arts, not just in film, but in the arts as a whole, to convey that sense of the inevitable. And this movie does it. Another movie that does it is Psycho, the original, the Hitchcock version. But really, even though at any point our protagonist could escape, like theoretically, if he knew what was in store for him, and because everything's nice and bright, right? Like he's just traveling around this island that has no overt horror trappings. So you get the sense that like if only he could somehow see what's coming, he could leave, but he doesn't. And in that way, the movie almost has like this Conradian sleepwalking effect, similar
Well,
to
the
what, let's
reason,
say, Harry Dean Stanton
yeah.
goes through in Alien when he is walking to his doom, right? He just pauses to have a shower,
Well,
because
the reason he can't escape is for the very reason he's going to end up being sacrificed is his religious beliefs,
that's right.
keep him pursuing what he thinks is the right thing to do.
That's right.
And also at a certain point, he does want to leave the island and come back with more police officers, but they've sabotaged his plane. And at that point, the die is cast. I also wanted to mention there are a couple of scenes where you see these young girls who are supposed to be naked, and this is very funny. They're jumping over the fire in this, also in a ceremonial dance thing, and it's causing outrage with Sergeant Howie as he responds to that. But in the 4K version of the movie now, you can clearly see that these girls are wearing like naked body stockings, and they're not naked. But when you watch this on
See, that's
low,
why you have to end your 4K obsession. No, because it's ruining all these movies for you. No,
but
I'm
it's so
joking.
funny because when you watch it on VHS, for sure you think they're naked. And when you watch it on DVD, it gives you a little bit more clarity, but you still completely think they're naked. And then you get into Blu-ray and you go, hey, I think not all of them are naked. And then when you see the 4K, you go, they're wearing body stockings.
But I can say the same thing is present in many movies if you watch them on, let's say, 4K or something that's just too high definition that the people who made the movies originally never anticipated would exist, right? So I've seen many movies even on Blu-ray where all of a sudden now for the first time I see a wire,
Oh,
where I
yeah.
wouldn't have on a DVD or a VHS copy.
But what I'm saying is, as you get up in resolution with this film, it becomes less offensive.
Oh, okay, there you go. Yeah.
There's so much in this film that makes children complicit in everything that's going on, including the final denouement of what happens to Howie. I mean, he's lured there, and everybody in this town is in on it. And when he's running through the village and he's opening doors, and you see these young girls pretending to be dead, and then they pop up and they're having the best time. All that are in on the plan to sacrifice a human being at the end. And it's all done with such joviality
Yes.
that gives it an additional creepiness, including when they start to wear the masks, which supposedly Robin Hardy came up with the concept for what each mask would look like. But they're such great masks because they don't feel new. They feel so creepy. They feel like a little bit out of Alice in Wonderland. There's something, and also the imagery of the hair in the village, like in the candy store where the woman's got all this really fun looking candy, but it's all like it's hairs and it's other kinds of bizarre chocolates, and she's selling like snuff, which is like tobacco chew or something. Well, there's so much little fun detail that gives the color to this village.
Including Aubrey Morris as the gravedigger.
Yes, Aubrey Morris, our friend from A Clockwork Orange.
That's right.
What
This
we
might
should,
be the first podcast in history to mention that actor twice in two different episodes.
well, you know what's also interesting? Two of the principal cast members from this film, within a year or two, are making a James Bond movie.
That's right.
And any guy who was salivating over Britt Ekland in The Man with the Golden Gun probably hadn't really been aware of The Wicker Man, where you could see everything you wanted to see in The
That's
Man with the
right.
Golden Gun that you couldn't see.
Yes.
And Britt Ekland, she was Swedish. And by the way, she's dubbed in this movie. I don't know if you're aware of that. She's dubbed by a Scottish singer named Annie Ross. And I always suspected she was dubbed because Britt Ekland has a Swedish accent, and this woman has a Scottish accent. and
Well,
she's
yeah, I
really,
always thought that was a bit strange.
this seems to be a running theme with a lot of the films we love, where the leading actresses are all like European and dubbed.
Yeah.
And I saw an interview with her, which probably took place about 10 years ago or so, and she seemed very proud to have done Get Carter and The Wicker Man, both which were, I don't know if it was Sight and Sound, or there was a poll taken in England of the 100 top movies, and both those films were selected to be among that
Yes.
list.
That's right.
And she talked a little bit about the making of The Wicker Man, and she said it was not a particularly happy shoot. She didn't get on with the director, Robin Hardy, at all. And she didn't really get close to anybody on the set except for Diane Cilento. She didn't seem to really think that the movie was going to be anything other than just another job. It was a very low budget movie. I think the movie was only made for £750,000. So they didn't have a lot of resources. Yet when you see the movie, it looks very well covered to me.
For
There's
sure.
great camera work by, who was the cinematographer? It's Harry Waxman, I believe. And the production design, the scale. The Wicker Man's final shot, when the actual Wicker Man burning head falls over and reveals the sunset, is one of the greatest final shots in film history.
Yes.
And just fluke that they even got that shot.
That often happens, or happens more often than you'd think, put it that way. One thing that I want to say, which we didn't discuss yet, is the way that the film is an allegory of religious dogma, and it's against religious dogma. So obviously, it's a critique of fanatical Christian beliefs, or like I said before, believing in anything in a fanatical way. So the pagan stuff, which you said is seductive and fun, nonetheless, it results in people being sacrificed. So
And what's the
both,
problem with that?
yeah, well, yeah, maybe nothing, but uh no, so the thing is, the way I have always read the film, so to speak, is that it's a critique of religious fanaticism, no matter what religion we're talking about. And so the movie is more relevant today than when it came out. because there are all kinds of religious, fanatics roaming the countryside, and not just the countryside.
And
Um,
cult.
yeah, and cults, that's right. Cults of personality for sure. And it's interesting too, because think of all the cult leaders who forced their followers to commit suicide that came after this movie was released, right? So again, the movie's very prophetic. But the other thing that I find fascinating about the movie is that Anthony Shaffer, he was an Orthodox Jew, at least that's what he was raised as. So, following sort of the Jewish tradition of being skeptical of hardcore dogma, he seems to have brought that into this movie, right? That skepticism. He's brought that into the universe of this film. Because obviously, Judaism is not a proselytizing religion. It doesn't ask people who are part of the tribe to
Yeah.
blindly follow something without question. And in fact, it has many traditions that encourage interpreting the sacred texts, right? So I find that interesting, meaning maybe it took an outsider to even think up a story like this, which obviously works as a parable or as an allegory. None of these things that I'm saying are ever stated explicitly,
What's
but
interesting is that Christianity loses in this film
yes,
because this chaste virgin man who goes to his death singing the Lord's Prayer and accepting his fate, but in the name of religion, is sacrificed. And at the same time, the pagans don't know if it's going to work. So the idea, this is why I say I don't think of the Wicker Man as being traditionally a horror movie, because the crops have never failed on this island before, since I think it was Christopher Lee's character, Lord Summerisle's grandfather or great grandfather, who came to the island and started developing the strains for these apples. So we don't know if sacrificing a human being, despite having all the right characteristics or checks all the boxes of what the ritual requires, we don't know if it's going to do any good for them. And as Sergeant Howie says, what if it doesn't work? Because then they're supposed to sacrifice the leader of the tribe or the
that's
island, which
right.
would be Lord Summerisle himself the following year. And Summerisle goes, it will work. And we obviously don't know that. There is literally no actual supernatural events taking place in this movie. There's a belief in them. There's a belief in a pagan lifestyle bringing about a certain spiritual energy with it, and a fanaticism, like you said, that this group or this cult of people who seem to be living this very benign life, a fun life, an uninhibited life, have to resort to this extreme violence to continue the life at the end.
Yes.
So I think of The Wicker Man as more as a psychological thriller, but it is the grandfather of folk horror movies. And because of the actual Wicker Man,
Which
this
looks great, by the way. The
structure,
actual
yeah,
iconography of it is great.
and has been so influential that it even influenced the Burning Man festival.
Yeah.
And I haven't been to Burning Man myself, but every time I see images from it, I go, clearly, whoever came up with this thing in the first place was imitating the Wicker Man, which
Yes.
also leads me to this point of how influential among horror filmmakers and films the Wicker Man film itself has been. Because
Yes.
I can name several movies that have not only been influenced by the Wicker Man, they've literally ripped it off. And I'm not even including the PG-13 remake, which, when it comes to the films they won't make anymore, didn't even really make it back in 2006 or 2005 when they probably filmed it. It was already like, we can't do this, we can't do that, we can't do this.
Yes.
So let's do the stupid idea about bees. But I don't know if you're familiar with Ben Wheatley's film The Kill List, because that
Yes.
film is clearly inspired by The Wicker Man
Yes.
in the final sequences. Then there was this HBO limited series that came out a few years ago with Jude Law called The Third Day, which was a total Wicker Man ripoff. And then we get to Ari Aster's films, both Hereditary, which the ending, like The Kill List, very similar ending, is a total Wicker Man ending. And then he one-ups himself and does a literal uncredited remake of The Wicker Man itself, called Midsummer with Florence Pugh. And I think both Ari Aster's movies, Hereditary and Midsummer, are excellent movies, but Midsummer is the fucking Wicker Man. You know,
Oh,
they
for
might as well,
sure. It's
they
basically
should
a
have
ripoff. Yeah.
credited Anthony Shaffer because it's a modern
Yeah,
reimagining
basically
of
the
the
only
Wicker Man.
difference, the only major difference, I mean, yeah, of course there's small differences throughout, but one of the major, I guess, thematic differences is that instead of having, a pagan tradition from the UK, it's just situated somewhere else.
I think it's
Um,
in is it Sweden or what? Yeah,
Yeah, so other than that though, really the movies are very similar. And I far prefer The Wicker Man for many reasons. I prefer its tongue-in-cheek sense of humor. I prefer its pacing. I prefer its originality. But another movie that, by the way, Edward Woodward is in it. It's Hot Fuzz. Hot Fuzz is basically a
yeah,
parody
but
of The
that's a
Wicker Man.
satire of it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. It's a parody, and it even has him in it.
yeah, yeah.
So there you go.
I wanted to say about Ari Aster's Midsummer, I do give him credit for doing it with the explicit authenticity of a Wicker Man film. So there's a lot of nudity,
Yes.
there's violence. He's not pulling back and doing the PG-13 Wicker Man. He's going for it too. So that is a positive about that.
But it lacks the Wicker Man.
It does because for them to go to do the actual Wicker Man, I think they would have been in rights
Yeah, of
issue
course. But I mean,
trouble
that
and
actually hurts the movie because it doesn't have a single image that is as memorable as the Wicker Man at the end of the Wicker Man.
well,
At least I think so.
they have that big flowery banquet. I think it's interesting imagery, but and it's a very good movie if you've never seen The Wicker Man.
That's
And
right.
if you have seen The Wicker Man, you're like, what the fuck? Just
Exactly.
call it the fucking Wicker Man and put the Wicker Man in.
That's right.
I want to mention this other thing about the Wicker Man, which is an essential component of it, which is the music. These bawdy songs that Paul Giamatti composed for the film and is in the film himself. You see him singing, and he's part of the village population. I think The Wicker Man is also a musical, and
Oh, it
I
is. Yeah.
and I'm shocked that The Wicker Man hasn't been put on Broadway because it's got the perfect structure to make a great fucking stage show.
That's true.
But there
Um,
are all these great songs throughout The Wicker Man. As I mentioned, Paul Giamatti, who was American, by the way, and I think he was living in the UK. And Robin Hardy had seen some Shakespearean adaptation he did, like a modern rock version. And Paul Giamatti had never even done a score before. And some of the score is actually really good. He mentions he was encouraged to put, the scene where they're chasing Howie and Rowan Morrison through the caves.
yes.
He was encouraged to bring an electric guitar, and which feels so out of place for that movie. And he comments that he hates that piece of music and wishes he could change it. And when I was watching it the other night, it did stick out to me for the first time, and I thought this music doesn't really belong here, which didn't ruin the movie for me in any way. But
I appreciate some of those jarring stylistic aspects because it just creates or it further accentuates the strangeness of the movie. Similar, by the way, another movie that comes to mind from the same period is The Ruling Class, the Peter O'Toole movie,
yeah,
because it also has strange musical numbers throughout, like very strange musical numbers that you're not at all expecting to occur. And it also talks about, I mean, it contains themes that are similar to the Wicker Man's, insanity, fanaticism, a critique of religious devotion that is unreasonable, on and on. So that's an interesting movie to pair with this one as well.
yeah, I've only seen The Ruling Class one time quite a while ago, so I would need to refresh on it. I found it kind of a strange movie, although
Oh, it's a very strange movie, but I
I
love it.
find the director Peter Menek to be very talented. I've liked a lot of his movies,
He's
like
great.
Romeo's Bleeding and The
And by the way,
Crave.
he's also Jewish. So again, there's a theme here. It's like there's a Jewish sensibility that is skeptical of people who are overly devoted to an ism, whatever that ism
I've
means.
met Peter Menek, and I know his son. His son is a camera operator and worked on a couple of my movies.
Oh, wow.
And his daughter was a teacher at a Jewish day school that my wife knew, or my son might have even been in one of her classes, or she was a teaching assistant, something to do with that. So about the music, the song Gently Johnny, which is the most famous song from this movie, and all these songs are very bawdy and erotic, was a song that was cut out of the theatrical cut. And people bemoaned that for a long time. So when the director's cut and then the final cut was released, and that was one of the assets of the Harvard Archive print. So it was nice to see it in improved quality, but it was still missing. I don't know if Gently Johnny was missing any footage from the final cut, but I think it might have been The Landlord's Daughter, which is probably the bawdiest song.
Yeah.
Although, I mean, they're all are. I mean, it's so funny. But The Landlord's Daughter definitely, if you watch the director's cut, it has more verses that are not in the other cuts, and they are quite bawdy verses.
So are you saying you always watch the director's cut?
Yes, I only watched the director's cut because I want to see the full version. That was the cut that Robin Hardy stood behind. Now, he got behind the final cut because it was getting released. It was more footage in the film, and he knew that he was never going to recover the low quality footage as high quality, like off a negative or a positive print. I don't know what happened to the Roger Corman print because that's the print that they should have gone back to and used it to put in the additional missing pieces that were not in the theatrical cut. But somehow that print hasn't turned up again.
Very mysterious.
Yeah. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but The Wicker Man, while mostly original to Anthony Shaffer, was actually based on a obscure novel called The Ritual.
Yeah, I
I'm
did
sure
know that. I've never read it.
they don't speak very highly of the book. It was by an author named David Pinner, and he's not credited in the film. And Paul Giovanni, the composer, he gave a quote and he said, "The novel was bad, a fifth rate piece of work, a bare, unrealized sketch of an idea that only hinted at things that would later become The Wicker Man." So I think the producer of The Wicker Man, Peter Snell, wanted to do a project with Anthony Shaffer. And he came to him and he said, "What can we work on?" And they had this book that became just the genesis for what Shaffer would build it into. And that's how it got going. But I think clearly Shaffer threw out most of the book. That's why when you see the film, it doesn't say written by Anthony Shaffer, it says screenplay by. But it never quotes a source for the adaptation.
Why do
And
you think that was? Why was that?
I think because Shaffer probably deviated so far from
Oh,
what
I
was in
see.
that book.
So how
But I
come
don't
so
know.
how come they retrospectively have to give the novel credit, but when it comes to Ari Aster's movie, he doesn't have to give any credit
Well, they're not giving
whatsoever?
the novel credit because I don't believe it's credited in the final cut,
Oh
is
no,
it?
I don't mean on the film itself, but I mean it's been discussed, right?
Well, I mean, Midsummer is its own thing
No,
in
I
a
know, I'm
sense
just
of
joking, but
characters and all that, but Anthony Shaffer did write his own novelization, if you want to call it that. I didn't even think it was a novelization. I just thought he had an original novel when I read it, and I think it's fairly hard to get hold of, although it may have been reissued recently. But it's great and it's a great read and it's got more texture. And if you're a Wicker Man fan, do try to get your hands on that because, like Night Moves, the novelization is by the original screenwriter. So, like Night Moves, written by Alan Sharp, who wasn't quite satisfied with what Arthur Penn did at times in the film, he got a chance to release his own novelization and he changed a few things to be the way he wanted. So I imagine the novel Wicker Man might. I'm trying to remember if it has things that deviated from the film. I'd have to go back and read it, but I remember it being a really good novel. And if you're a fan of the film, as I said, you probably want to read it.
yeah, I haven't read it because it's very obscure, but I should because Anthony Shaffer is one of my favorite writers in general, and when it comes to dramatists in particular, he's even higher up on my list. I think he's just one of the most original dramatists the world has ever produced. And that might sound like a hyperbole, but I don't think it is. Watch Sleuth, watch Frenzy, and watch The Wicker Man. They're extremely original dramatic works, I think, by any standard.
Oh, I agree with you.
And no one else could have written them. They're so particular.
Well, they're all very twisty
Yes.
stories where Shaffer is having a lot of fun leading the audience in, or the reader in one direction, and then swinging around and surprising them with something else. But they're also all, the protagonists or antagonists all have this grand design
Yes.
that has been planned, and somebody is led into the spider web unknowingly or by their own devices, but they're not smart enough to outthink the antagonist.
Correct. And I love the fact that he indulges in theatricality. He roots the theatricality in some form of realism, which is also interesting. So again, that's part of what makes him so unique. He indulges in theatricality at a time when a lot of other people weren't doing that. They were much more interested in naturalism or realism or something like that. He was like, if you look at Sleuth and you compare it to, for example, a movie like Serpico or The French Connection, look at how different it is. You know what I mean? Its entire sensibility is so far removed from what was in vogue at the time. But it also just goes to show you that in the 20th century, if you look at every major decade of film, there were so many different styles on display, right? You could have a movie like Sleuth come out the same year as The Godfather and Cabaret, and look at how different each of those movies happens to be, right? And we talked about this before when we were talking about A Clockwork Orange from 1971. There's so many movies from 1971 with, and each one has a completely different style, not to mention thematic content.
Exactly. The other thing we should talk about is the cast in The Wicker Man. I think Edward Woodward gives such a great performance.
He does.
So remarkable playing this buttoned up, ultra religious, but fair minded guy who is so overwhelmed. It's like a Christian man arriving at a pagan Disneyland.
Yes.
And his expressions when he encounters this bizarre behavior from the islanders, whether it's like Rowan Morrison's mother, like putting the frog in her daughter's mouth, or Diane Salento's character with his erotic teachings to this classroom of these young girls. How old are those girls? Like 12. He walks out of the pub into like this little, or near this grassy area, and there's like 50 townspeople having sex, like openly, like it's a
Yes.
mass orgy, and his mind is blown. There's a naked woman sitting on a grave, like communing with her dead husband. When he visits what he believed was consecrated ground, looking for Rowan Morrison's grave, there's a woman breastfeeding her child with her shirt open, sitting on a grave. Another one's got an egg in her hand. The imagery is so bizarre, and his reaction to every place he goes, he's disgust, he's contempt, his frustration, and also his sexual arousal.
Yes.
Because the great scene, I love the scene when Britt Ekland attempts to seduce, well, she knows. It's an interesting scene because you would think she's attempting to seduce Sergeant Howe while he's in his bed, and she's in the opposite room and she's banging on the walls and she's dancing and singing, and he's just like so sexually aroused that he's like fighting himself not to go into the room and have sex with her. But the plot requires that he doesn't have sex with her because then he won't be a virgin for the ceremony.
That's right.
So,
and it's a very tongue-in-cheek sequence as well, in a very
subtle,
strange way.
Because what if he had lost control and had gone next door and forced himself
then he could have saved himself.
Character? Then he would have saved himself.
Yes.
And it's interesting because I think they might have approved of that, because then he would be fallen. His Christianity, his moral code would have failed, and they would have been, okay, maybe we'll have to find someone else to kill him. But he fails the test.
That's right.
The test. If he had gone next door and had sex with her, he would still be alive.
Well, again, but that's where the critique of fanaticism comes in, right? Because his fanaticism, which represses him, it ends up leading to his death, right? I mean, in many ways, not just in that particular scene's case, but it's also the fanaticism of the pagan
And
people
this is also
that
why I want to advocate for the director's cut, because in the director's cut, you see him sitting in bed at night while Britt Ekland, Willow, takes in this young Ash Buchanan kid, and you hear her having sex with him, and he's sitting in bed so sexually frustrated. So he's already experienced that, but you don't see that in the other cuts, if I'm not mistaken. So by the time he's in bed and she's trying to seduce him through the wall, there's almost no context for what happened the previous night because there isn't a previous night. And that shows you how a filmmaker's intent and original work can be so butchered by idiot producers or distributors who just don't understand a fucking thing about what the film is.
that's right.
And Britt Ekland is so sexy in that scene. It doesn't even need to be said. And it's clearly not a singing voice either. I guess it's Annie Ross singing, I think. But again, in the director's cut, like I said, the way she moves around the room is way more provocative than what you see in any of the other cuts, even though it's sexy. And even in its theatrical cut, I would say it was sexy.
Yes.
And then also in the movie,
And that's an example of a scene that wouldn't be done today just because that level of nudity would
well,
be
it should
deemed.
be done because The Wicker Man is an erotic film.
Oh no, I agree.
And,
I
and
think it's
it's
a
an erotic
masterpiece, that scene.
seduction.
Yeah.
It's an erotic
No, I
seduction.
didn't mean that like I'm against. I'm just saying
No, I
that by
get
the
that. Yeah.
standards of today, which are ridiculous,
Well, they would
that
do the scene, but they would have her in a little nightie or lingerie or something. They wouldn't go full out nudity unless it's Ari Aster. And
yeah,
God bless
or
Ari
unless it's
Aster.
a man instead of a woman.
Or it's a woman director.
Yeah.
Or they would make The Wicker Man, they would make it a woman come into the island. I mean, they would flip it around. They would do
Exactly.
something to just dilute the male gaze from the film, should I say. Edward Woodward should have, in my opinion, should have been nominated for that performance. It is such a strong performance, and he's always on in the film. And then the hysteria of the end when he realizes what they're going to do to him. And apparently, when he's in the Wicker Man itself and he's singing all the verse, that was him. He wanted to add all that and the Bible quotations and all that. So that wasn't from Schaffer's script. I think he, in the original script in the book, he dies pretty quickly.
How many times have you seen the movie, do you think?
I've seen The Wicker Man at least 50 times, and every time I see it, I love it. It's such a good film. It's such a literate film. It's
It
so
is.
well produced, so well written, so well directed. It's not junk. It's not particularly gory. It's all atmosphere. It's all mood. It's creepy, but it's funny. Let's not forget that. It's
It
very
is.
funny in places. It's goofy in places in a good way, not in an unintended way. The
And these are all Anthony Shaffer's qualities, by the way, because you could say the same thing about Frenzy. You could say the
Yeah.
same thing about Sleuth, especially Sleuth, when they're playing dress up in
Oh
one of the
yeah.
sequences.
Yeah. So Edward Woodward is just wonderful. And I'm trying to remember what he had done before this movie because he seems pretty young in the movie. He seems at maybe 30 or 35 or something like that. Then Christopher Lee, someone mentioned something that was quite interesting. I think it was a reviewer at the time of the film in the UK, and I think I read this in Cinema Fantastique. I don't know if they publish this magazine anymore, but they did a dedicated Wicker Man issue, and it's really comprehensive. And the critic of the movie at the time said he felt Christopher Lee was a giveaway in the role because Christopher Lee brings a sinister presence with him to every performance. So we always felt that he was up to no good on
It's
the
just because
island.
of his voice.
Yeah, but he also has a very villainous look. I mean, there was nothing he could do about it. I mean, he made a career out of it, including Scaramanga
Yeah, of course. He's
and
great.
Dracula, of course.
And
Yeah,
Lord of the
yeah,
Rings.
yeah. And if he felt that the actor cast as Lord Summerisle was more sort of benevolent and didn't have the Christopher Lee baggage, the audience wouldn't be as suspicious of Christopher Lee's intentions, which clearly we are. We don't think any good is going to come to Sergeant Howie because of who Christopher Lee is.
Yeah, but you know what? It didn't matter who played that part because the audience knows that something must be up anyway, you know? So,
Well, I will say you're assuming that because of knowing the movie and because of Christopher Lee. But if that character was played by David Niven, for example,
oh, okay, yeah.
it was more
He could have
avuncular.
done it.
Yeah.
But by
you
the
would
way,
think,
Christopher Lee's performance in this movie is pretty amiable. He's not like compared to some of his other villains,
but
he's not.
he turns dark pretty quickly at times. Like during the actual when they're doing the dances, and Edward Woodward is knocked out the innkeeper and taken over his punch costume, and then they're moving along in the procession, and Christopher Lee yells to him, "What's wrong with you, man? Cut a caper." I love, I love that. Like, and then he's got the wig on and the
Yes.
makeup, and that I love that part of the Christopher Lee performance. It's such a fun movie, and that whole scene where they cross the swords, right? And you must have liked the part where the swords
Yeah,
make
that's great.
They make the Jewish star. So for
Yeah.
all the anti-Semites in the world, oh, you see, it started with the Wicker Man. They're
Yeah.
evil. Their symbols are evil. They cut the heads off people. Anyway, we're not going there. But also in the movie, in a very small part, which apparently was imposed on the production because she had value within the genre, is Ingrid Pitt, who was quite well known as a Hammer horror actress from like The Vampire Lovers and Countess Dracula, and also in Where Eagles Dare.
Yes.
And she was German or Austrian, I'm not sure, but she was a very beautiful woman. And of course, Robin Hardy gets her naked in the bathtub at some point, and who's going to complain about that, I guess. But I actually like a non-sexy scene where she's in the records office.
And by the way, she's Jewish too.
All these
No,
Jews.
she actually is. Like her mother was Jewish, so according
That's
to
interesting.
halacha, Jewish
I
law,
would have
she's
never
Jewish.
thought. She was German Jewish?
Polish.
Polish. Okay. So when Edward Woodward comes into the record keeping office and he wants to see if there's a record of Rowan Morrison's death, and she's eating lunch there. I think she handles it so well, the way she does the performance, where she's got this look of boredom and indifference and why are you bothering me? But there's also like a subtle something a little bit off about her. There's something a little bit off about everybody in this village.
Oh, actually, I just want to say one more thing. She was actually a Holocaust survivor. That's amazing. Ingrid
Oh,
Pitt. She was
yeah.
actually in a concentration camp with her mother, but they escaped.
Wow.
That's
That's,
incredible.
yeah. Yeah. Well, a good thing she escaped.
Yeah, there you go.
And I don't mean that frivolously. She did a lot of great films.
No, of
And
course. Well, any human being that escapes, it's important.
no, obviously. But
Yes.
an iconic vampirist escaped.
Yeah,
So
there you go.
Russell Waters, who plays the harbor master, is interesting. All these great character actors, and they went into these small villages. I mean, they shot this movie all over Scotland. In fact, Christopher Lee's castle is shot over two different locations, which I believe was separated by like 40 miles apart or something. I don't think they actually shot on any real island. I think they were in like Dumfries and Galloway and the Highlands of southwest Scotland. So there was a lot of company moves in this film. And you know what's interesting? And I think this is in all the cuts. The film starts with a fake credit that is a thank you to Lord Summerisle and the inhabitants of Summerisle, which is obviously a fictional place. And I wonder if that's what inspired the Coen brothers with their fake title card from Fargo. Because there weren't a lot of people doing this kind of stuff back then, like faking out the audience with this stuff.
That's a very good question. I wonder if it did, and I wonder if it directly inspired them.
I have to believe they would have seen it.
So it's possible.
And then Diane Salento, I find very charming in this film. And
Yes.
you can absolutely see why Sean Connery would have been attracted to her. I think she was beautiful and elegant. And I've seen her in a bunch of performances, and she's very good.
Yes.
And this actor, Lindsay Camp, who plays Alder McGregor, I believe he's the innkeeper, gives a very bizarre, eccentric performance. And I'm not sure what he's been in before.
Wait, which actor?
Lindsay Camp. He plays the innkeeper, the father of
Yeah, I know who you're
Britt
referring to.
Ekland's character, but didn't do that much. Wow,
He was
almost
a
nothing.
mime. He was a
Yeah,
mime.
he was in Savage Messiah, which was that a Ken Russell movie? Yeah, it was. And The Wicker Man seems to be his only other prominent performance, but he was very good.
Yeah, he was. No, so it's a very good cast. And I would think that the most iconic actor in it is Christopher Lee, because Edward Woodward, even though he's a great actor, he probably wasn't as well known
No, no, I don't
internationally.
even think Britt Ekland was very well. And she had done Get Carter, but it was a very small role in it.
Yeah, so probably the most famous actor then and now who's in the movie is Christopher Lee.
That's right, which gave it a more sort of grounded quality since people didn't really know these actors. And Edward Woodward went on to do The Equalizer, but that was many years after this film, I believe.
Yes.
And he did a bunch of feature films. He's the real deal. He's a fantastic actor. His performance in this film is one of my favorite performances by any actor in any film. I think another actor who didn't nail it like this could have ruined the movie.
No, he's a great actor in general. Have you ever seen the movie Breaker Morant?
Oh yeah, yeah,
It's a
excellent
great
movie.
movie.
Excellent movie, yeah. Oh, so the poet who Shaffer quotes from in the scene where Christopher Lee presents the teenager to Britt Ekland's character to take his virginity, and then he goes on and he's quoting this poem, and that's when you have the scene with the snails mating. It's by Walt Whitman.
One of my favorite poets.
Even more reason for you to get your hands on the director's cut.
I'm going to have to do that.
And you've never seen that version at all?
No, I think I have, because I think I saw it in a set, one of those European ones. This was years ago. Meaning I saw it on a either DVD, it was probably a DVD special edition that included more than one version of the film. But the version that
Yeah.
I've seen the most times is the final cut on
The
Blu-ray.
final cut only came out the last couple of years. I'd be surprised if the final cut has been out for more than 5 years.
Yeah,
This,
because by the way, I've watched it because here's the thing. I did not own, I rented it from the library when the first time I ever saw it was on television. Then the first hard copy I ever experienced was one that I rented from the library. This was years ago, time back when I was in high school. So, but then when I started making money and could afford to buy movies left, right, and center, then I stopped going to the library and just ended up owning as much as I could. But it took me a while to be able to track down a copy of The Wicker Man that I could actually own.
I
'Cause
found
I,
that very surprising because since Ankubei took over the distribution rights at that point, and I don't think they have it anymore.
Well,
Mine
if we
comes
go
from
back to the days of, let's say, video stores or not just video stores where you rent movies like Blockbuster, but let's just say DVD stores, right? Or home video stores, I could never find a copy of it in Canada, at least.
well,
In
Canada's in the
Toronto
backwater.
specifically,
Canada is in the backwaters of the planet. I mean, of course
I
you wouldn't find
guess.
it in Canada, but there
Yeah.
was a thing called Amazon for a long time. Like I said, I have the original VHS. I have a couple of DVDs of it. I have a Blu-ray set of it, and I have the 4K set. So they've taken a lot of money out of my pocket, these Wicker Man creators or whoever controls the rights. I think it's a pretty well-known movie today, but I'm curious if millennials and Gen Z and younger are aware of it. They're definitely aware of the Ari Aster films.
Yes.
So maybe because of their interest in the Ari Aster movies, they have sought out the Wicker Man. And also because there's been a rise in interest in folk horror. I saw a documentary about a year or two ago that was like 3 hours long on folk horror all over the world. But most of the folk horror seems to take place out of the UK for some reason.
Yes. It's interesting. Well, also even Straw Dogs, which we're going to cover on a future
Yeah, for
episode.
sure. You're right.
Um,
Very interesting. The Village and Straw Dogs could very much be one where the Wicker Man could be set.
Well, there's a tradition of telling ghost stories on Christmas Day, and maybe that has something to do with it. So there's a sort of a folksy British or at least English tradition of
Do you in Canada celebrate Guy Fawkes Day?
no.
Because weirdly, when I grew up in South Africa, we did, and that's also burning an effigy and a little bit closer to kind of like a Wicker Man vibe that particular day, because it was the guy who tried to blow up the Houses of Parliament, named, I believe his name was Guy Fawkes, obviously.
Yes.
And I think since that point on, every year they celebrate by burning an effigy of him and also setting off fireworks. So that was a little bit like our 4th of July there. And I remember my uncle or father would always come back with this huge bag of fireworks on the night to burn. And since then, wherever you go, fireworks have pretty much been made illegal. So people are
Well, in
generally,
Northern Ireland to this day, they do their bonfires.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think we touched on this a little bit, but Robin Hardy's life was really messed up by the way they distributed this movie, or didn't distribute it as such, and spent the rest of his life trying to find the assets for this film. And frankly, if I was Robin Hardy, if I was the UK government, I'd dig up the fucking M3 or M4 and get this negative out, because it's culturally so important to the history of film. You can always repair a damn road, and maybe people will be disadvantaged for a short time, but get the damn negative out. Talk about film preservation. If you know it's in that fucking place, or it's rotting away in there, maybe it's not. Maybe it's preserved, or maybe it's sitting somewhere else. But it's so disturbing that somebody can just disappear all the hard work that people have made.
And it just goes to show you that even in an age where technology was flourishing, and I'm talking about the 20th century, not just our current century, they were still unable to preserve many works of art, which is very unfortunate,
Well,
right?
this has happened in the film soundtrack community as well, where once the score was mixed into the film and they had made the selects for what the soundtrack album, if there was ever going to be one, was, they recorded over these tapes. So there's thousands or hundreds of landmark film scores where they can't find the original sessions tapes, including the first three James Bond films. It's shocking how many assets have gone missing or burned down in fires. And even, I believe, when they were re-releasing the Star Wars movies quite a few years ago, their negatives or their assets had deteriorated, and they had to go on a worldwide scavenger hunt to find different prints to make up sections of a
That's
movie
right.
as recent as that. And what concerns me about this digital age we're living in, because the Wicker Man was shot on film, but you could just lose computer information. Your hard drives can get erased from a magnetic pulse, something. You can just lose your film. Now, granted, once a movie is released today, it gets put out there on thousands of Blu-rays and 4K discs. But the studios, if they've got a big budget film, they still archive back to 35 millimeter, because it's probably going to last another couple hundred years.
Yes. And not to mention, well, I shouldn't say not to mention, film posters were often destroyed. They were ordered to be destroyed, from my understanding.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate because so many of them have been lost.
Well,
You know,
clearly,
my,
a lot of them weren't destroyed because people valued the collector's potential in them. And
correct.
I know, and I talked about this on the James Bond podcast, that when a Bond movie came out, I went out of my way to figure out how to get the original one sheets, because they, to me, they were super valuable. And you had to bribe cinema managers or distributors. At one point, my mother worked in a company in South Africa that sold South Africa movie premiere tickets, and they would put posters up in the office, and she would try and get them for me when they were done selling for the film. And I think I was able to get the Man with the Golden Gun poster that way, which I don't have that one anymore. I have a different one that I've bought since, but I really valued that poster. It was so beautiful. But the soundtracks and the actual film negatives and the different cuts, I mean, I don't even know where the crossing over negative is stored today if I get the opportunity to bring out my director's cut and find all that. A lot of these labs have closed down because digital has consumed film. So I don't know where all their assets have been stored, and whether a company like, it doesn't own it anymore, Lionsgate owns it now, but Weinstein Company, whether they even ordered negatives or outtakes and things like that to be destroyed. It's such a mystery. A couple of years ago, this company out of the UK was looking to they did bring out the Cooler on Blu-ray, but at terrible quality and a 1080i. And I did all this work for them, giving them private materials for the release. And then the actual movie itself that they put out on the Blu-ray is subpar quality. And I was trying to find the negative for them at one point, and it took me a circuitous route to try and find it. And eventually, I think through the help of the woman who used to run Deluxe, I think I found the information out. But since I wasn't the owner of the film, they would only go so far as to give me any information about it, because I can't go in and get the negative of the Cooler. I'm not the owner of the asset.
So can you only
So
imagine how in less sophisticated times, in less technologically proficient times, how many works of art were lost forever that we'll never know about because we didn't have means of mechanical reproduction? Just makes you wonder, right? For example, the greatest novel ever written could have been lost because it was in some guy's drawer and it was never duplicated, right? And there's only one copy and it got destroyed.
That would have to be like Fahrenheit 451 plot, where everybody has to remember the novel that got lost.
Exactly. But I've thought about
Everybody,
that many times, right? How do we know that the greatest work of art that was ever created was not lost or destroyed? There's no way to prove it. It's possible, right? Someone could have written a novel as great as War and Peace or Moby Dick, and it just never left someone's drawer.
well, enough classic movies, even today, are being threatened with deteriorating assets and negatives and need to be restored. They can't keep up with it. And it seems like only the really successful and high profile ones are getting the treatment. But at the same time, while none of my movies have ever received a 4K release, or frankly, a movie that got the most award attention, like The Cooler, has never even received from Lionsgate a Blu-ray release. There's so many obscure movies, exploitation movies, films made for 10 cents are now getting 4K releases from a lot of these companies. And I sit there scratching my head and going, why doesn't Lionsgate have an interest in putting this movie out in a quality version? You just can't understand the motivations behind these companies. I guess a lot of it is money, and they look at box office and they project numbers and how many sales and all this. But the physical media market today is very niche. It's deep-pocketed people who want to own these things, but it's very niche in terms of profits. I'm starting to not understand how they monetize film at all, because the streamers have a different way of valuing success to do with their algorithms and how many people viewed this and that. But in the past, it was how many people actually paid for your film or turned up at the box office and bought a ticket.
That's right.
So
I used to love, though, going to even, let's say, department stores and they would have a bargain bin of sometimes obscure DVDs.
I used to go to the Tower Records outlet, and this had to be in the early 90s, where the only formats that existed at that point were VHS and very, very expensive laserdiscs, although the 4Ks now are about as expensive almost as the laserdiscs. And they would have an entire outlet store dedicated to selling their surplus or previously rented VHSs, and they would sell them for about $5 to $10. And I would visit there at least once or twice a week to get videotapes that would normally, if you bought them off the shelf, cost $80, $90.
Yeah, wow.
But I didn't realize at the time, and you don't, that it's such an subpar format and everything was pan and scanned. And if I could have looked into a crystal ball and known that I would be rebuying everything, not just on DVD or not just on Laserdisc, but on DVD and then Blu-ray. And now some of my favorite films I'm buying on 4K, it becomes an addiction because you say, the Blu-ray is pretty good quality, and I don't think I'm going to upgrade to that. And then you go, I was at a friend's house or something, I saw the 4K. Oh my God, I haven't seen the movie before. You just get pulled into it.
Isn't it weird though how we film fanatics think alike? Because I have the same thoughts, right? I'll say to myself, "No, I have enough copies of the James Bond movies. I'm not
I
going to
have
buy any more versions."
I have
That's
like 4 or 5 copies of Cutter's Way, different formats.
yeah.
Jacob's Ladder, that's one I just picked up in 4K and it looks great.
Like all of the major Steven Spielberg movies, the Alien movies, on and on, Alfred Hitchcock movies. I just keep buying every new edition.
Yeah, I guess they rely on us to keep it alive
Yeah.
because there's an entire generation out there that just steals it.
There you go. But I like the tangible. But the other thing too is we both got to live through a period, and you lived through a longer period of this, where it was fun and desirable to have tangible copies of things.
And
Right?
I
Someone
still
who's
think it
born
is.
now will never, of course, but
I
someone
still
who's
buy
born now may never
CDs.
experience that.
One of the blessings of the boutique niche soundtrack market, and this is thanks to companies like Intrada and La La Land and Perez Saraband and a couple others, they only put out on CDs. I think maybe Perez also does some digital files that you can buy. But all these CDs, these expanded soundtrack the complete film scores that are coming out, and like finally they're doing all the Bonds and all these older John Barrys and all of this, they're all on CDs. So while everybody's moved on to streaming and digital and Spotify and all that shit, I'm buying CDs. And I can then digitize my own CD to put it into iTunes or whatever it is. And
Yes.
I still own the original asset of that. It's not the original, but it's got a booklet where they write about it. It's got the artwork. Granted, it's nothing like an old LP and how stunning those were, or Laserdisc for that matter. Laserdisc had some of the best artwork. And I was reading something about Gen Z. I think it's Gen Z. They really are going back and embracing physical media, which I think is great.
That is great.
Because if your favorite movie's on Netflix and you think it's going to be there next month, good luck. You're going to be on eBay paying hundreds of dollars to find an out-of-print movie that if you had bought it when it came out for like 15.
We should do an episode on this topic, tangible media versus streaming services, because there's so much we could say. By the way, I'm sure a lot of this is going to be edited, but
well, I don't know.
Or maybe not.
It's interesting. It's interesting because it does relate to The Wicker Man, where we're talking about a film that people don't know which version to watch or don't realize that they're
depending
watching
on
the
when you were
incomplete
born.
film.
That's right.
Even someone like you who is very film literate is not got in your possession the director's cut. And
No,
I'm not
because
saying
it's-
that as a pat on my back. It's just that loving this movie and knowing about this movie and having watched all the versions, I don't want to see a lesser version of it, even
And
if
also
the
that's
quality
because
is great.
depending on when you were born and depending on what technology was available to you in whatever society you happen to live in, you wouldn't have the ability to track down some of these copies. Like I said, I spent years trying to find a copy of The Wicker Man that was a tangible copy before I had money of my own where I could just buy any DVD I wanted, or before I had, let's say, an Amazon account. It was difficult to go to a video store and track it down. I could never find a copy. I'm just speaking for myself.
There is a movie that's finally coming out in 4K at the end of this month that I think was the last holy grail to hit physical media, because everybody over the years who is a fan of this movie would always have the most degraded, horrible VHS prints. And that movie is called Open Season, with Peter Fonda and William Holden in a smaller role, directed by Peter Carlson. And we're going to do an episode on it, because it's a fascinating film. The source novel is even better. I mean, it's not even a great film. It's a good film, but it could have been so much better. But it's definitely been one of those films like The Wicker Man that is almost like contraband and so difficult to find. And I did buy also on eBay a copy of Open Season and paid a lot of money to get it on VHS. And it's interesting to watch VHS quality material now, whether it's been digitized or it's on a VHS player, how bad the quality is. But it's also partly, it is bad, but it's also partly because the TVs we watch it on now are such high resolution.
That's right.
So
I think
if you
about
go
that
back
all the
and
time. Yeah.
If you go back and watch a VHS on an old tube TV, it's probably not going to look as bad as it looks on your.
But in general, it's worse than
75
anything we
inch.
have now. Yeah, but don't you also notice that, let's say, since the advent of HD and other things, when you look at, let's say, old news broadcasts, let's say on YouTube, how shitty the quality was compared to what we
Yeah.
have now, where everything is immaculate, right? Everything's naked, transparent.
I mean, we're living in an era where Blu-ray isn't even good enough for us. We're all into 4K, and there's people talking about bringing stuff out on 8K. I've drawn the line at 4K. I will never upgrade from 4K to another.
Oh, they'll wear you down.
No. I won't do it because it looks just damn great in 4K. I love being able to see all these forbidden films like A Clockwork Orange and Lost Tango and The Exorcist. All movies that I scramble to see a fourth, fifth, sixth generation VHS or a beta in South Africa. I see it better than audiences saw it on the big screen.
That's right.
So I think that's a positive note to leave this conversation on. I am thrilled that The Wicker Man exists as a film and exists on 4K, and I still hold out hope that one day somebody will dig up the M4 and get the damn negative and we can get the full version.
And how about
I'm that
releasing a decent
optimistic
copy
about
of
it.
Sleuth?
Is that not out on?
It's not available on any decent, high quality,
It was never
physical copy.
released on Blu-ray? I think it was.
It's not widely put this way. I can't find a copy on Amazon. I'd have to find one on eBay or
Do
something.
you have an all-region Blu-ray player?
I don't.
See, you got to start there. That's your first essential buy, because then you can find the Blu. A lot of times they are
No, I
Blu-rays.
know that. Yeah.
But I mean, for a guy like you, who's such a cinephile, I think that's like an essential. They're not even that expensive, but I mean, if you want to, you might as well get the 4K one now, which are a little bit pricey.
At some
But
point I will, but I already have thousands of DVDs and Blu-rays. So,
and you can still play them on this new player.
no, of course. But I mean, I guess I'm also worried that I'm going to be tempted to buy everything on 4K. You know what I mean? Like
Well,
I'm
you need to
trying to
hurry up and
prevent
become a
myself.
super, super successful producer where you can afford to buy whatever you want. And believe me, it doesn't matter how much money a person has, they do question feeding this habit a bit much. I
No,
mean,
it's
it's also
when
about,
I was a little kid, I used to think, why is it that like it's not fair that adults who have a lot of money compared to a kid who has none, can just go to the video store and buy whatever they want, and I can't do that. I used to be
you also assume the adults' money could only be allocated for movies versus cost of living and rent
exactly there you
and
go.
everything
No, no,
else
no, I
like
wasn't
that.
that naive, but I mean,
But we're also facing when you start to be a mad collector, and I am not a mad collector. I am quite circumspect about it, but there just happen to be a lot of movies that I do love, especially older movies,
yes,
and they take up space. So you want to
well, that's
display
right.
it, and you need storage space for them, and that is one of the advantages of being in the digital realm of like these guys who buy these massive hard drives. And even when they do buy 4Ks or Blu-rays, they rip them to the hard drives and then they never touch the original ever again, which is kind of sad.
It is sad. I just like tangible copies of works of art.
Well, it's ours. We've bought it, and nobody's going to go back into the movie and change guns into walkie-talkies and just say,
Yeah.
just live with it, or find out that the streamer lost the rights to it and suddenly the copy you thought you owned suddenly disappears from your film account and you get a little refund. It's like, fuck that. It's
Or
like,
or the Star Wars movies, especially the original trilogy, they've been, re-edited and special effects have been added, visual effects, I should say. So it's hard to find certain versions of each movie.
but if
Um,
you're a fanatic about a particular film, you can find anything.
oh, of course you can. Yeah.
If you're willing to spend a little bit of money, you can find anything. I don't think there is any movie other than a really lost movie. If it came out at any point on a VHS, a Laserdisc, a DVD, somehow, somewhere, someone will be selling it.
No, that's true.
They may charge you 5 times the price, but if you want it bad enough, you can find something. And that's the beauty of the internet today. I mean,
It
it brings
is.
about a lot of negative things in terms of social media and brainwashing people and all this bullshit. But one of the great things it's provided is it has connected the world for collectors of the arts.
That's
And I
right.
think that's where we'll leave it. So we'll be back with another episode of Forbidden Films very soon.
We sure will.